Everyone. So I just wanted to make this quick video to discuss some things that people have actually asked me in real life. They haven't asked as much on the channel, but I still think would be valuable to discuss on here as well, just so people know. People ask me sometimes, why do I cite Chemnitz and Gerhard and these scholastic figures more than I cite Luther? What's my interest in that? Why do I do that? Is it because I don't like Luther? Is it because I think he's not as good a theologian as they are? No. So I wanted to give a quick explanation of that and where I think Luther is super valuable for us. So the first reason I say that I cite Gerhard and Chemnitz more is honestly just because of the direction of the channel. As a channel, we're trying to popularize things that are not as well known. That's kind of our distinctive, so to speak, as Scholastic Lutherans. You can find tons of channels that discuss Luther. I mean, Brian Wolfmueller does just such a phenomenal job summarizing and discussing Luther. I very much admire him for that. And there are tons of channels, even, of the non-Lutheran traditions that will reference Luther. I mean, I know a lot of Baptists who really like Luther. A lot of the Reformed crowd really likes him. Some will even try to claim him. That's another story. I don't think they succeed in that. But nonetheless, just as a channel, we're trying to move towards something that makes us distinct, as opposed to some other groups, stuff that makes us unique, and we're really trying to contribute. And there's a lot to learn from the scholastics. I mean, even if they had the exact same method as Luther, the exact same theology, it'd still be valuable to put them out because they're just not as well known as Luther, and they're a really rich part of our history. So that's part of it. It's honestly a channel thing. But also, I would say that a lot of what we engage with as a channel is going to be more in the systematics area. And Luther does do a lot of systematic stuff. He will discuss topics pretty direct. I mean, he has his disputations a lot of the time. But I think the way Gerhard, Chemnitz, and other scholastics do it is so much more in depth, at least with respect to, say, patristic citations and engaging with the medievals. I think that's really important. And Gerhard, especially, is phenomenal on both of those. Really, really good for that. And so we want to add that kind of depth and thoroughness that Gerhard and Chemnitz do, which is why we cite them more. It's just they have more resources on that kind of, or in that vein, so to speak. Also, it's really helpful to have people who are interacting with the responses to Luther and the reaction to him, because Luther was obviously engaging with, say, Cajetan, and he was dealing with other figures at his time. But it's really nice to see, here's Chemnitz now responding to the Council of Trent. And here are later scholastics dealing with the development of, say, the Reformed tradition. Whereas Luther's dealing with a lot of the early stages of that. And so it's really nice to see, here's Gerhard, for example, responding to Bellarmine, who responds to Chemnitz, who's responding to Trent, right, who's responding to Luther. And so it's nice to see all of this as it goes out and gets more particular, more sophisticated, and so on, such that we're not simply doing, I suppose you could say, less clear or less defined issues. Because Gerhard, for example, goes in incredible depth on all these topics. He really nails things down with the Aristotelian categories, with the four causes. He does that very thoroughly. And so it's nice to put it in that way and to do it in line with Lutheran Orthodoxy, because we could kind of do it ourselves. You could spend time doing that. But Gerhard especially does that already, and it's really nice to have that. Chemnitz does it a little, and actually Luther later in life did too. Some stuff in his Antinomian disputations is really good on that. So, yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons as well. But I have to admit, I do err towards reading the scholastics more than I should, in the sense that I should be reading more Luther, right? I have a finite amount of resources, including time, money, and all that. And I probably have read the scholastics more than necessary, so to speak, in the sense that I should be reading more Luther, given the amount of time and resources I have. So I spent more time recently reading Luther, especially before I go to sleep, reading some of his homilies, and I've just been really edified by a lot of the things he says in his homilies. And I think that is one of the best ways to engage with Luther, is not necessarily trying to seek out everything he says on a specific theological topic, because again, I think our later writers are really good at systematizing a lot of that, and dealing in more depth than Luther was. But of course, Luther has some phenomenal stuff to say on those topics. But I think what's especially valuable is to read Luther insofar as he's a pastor, insofar as he's engaging with the issues of his day. If you want an example of a man with great courage, look at Luther. Look what he dealt with. A man with, great steadfastness to the truth, just a man to admire in those ways. He's a very interesting person in his own right. And so to read his homiletics, read his homilies and his style and all of that in light of who he is, I think it's really edifying. And so he had very unique experiences, and I think it's really helpful to read him, especially in light of all of that. So personally, the way I like to read these figures is I tend to use the scholastics more for my systematic theologies. More for like, hey, if I have a question about what's the nature of the law, I tend to go to Gerhard, right? Because he has his On the Law. Chemnitz has some good stuff in his various writings. That's great too, but Gerhard, I think, is in more depth. But when it comes down to a matter of, say, daily piety, I'm going to be reading a Luther sermon. Of course, Gerhard has some phenomenal stuff that we're actually, as people are aware, recording and putting out on the channel, and that stuff's great. But I mean, a lot of Luther's stuff is free, so I tend to go Luther in that direction for now. Yeah, so that's how I see it, and I think it's still valuable. You're going to get some great stuff out of Gerhard or Chemnitz in terms of piety, and you're going to get some great theology from Luther. But I think it's really nice to almost see this as a kind of specialization thing, right? Where it's like Gerhard, Chemnitz, the scholastics, those are the guys to go to for systematizing. But if you're trying to see something, your daily life, your daily piety, you can obviously go to Gerhard, but honestly, just given the amount of free content that Luther has, I just go towards Luther. And I will be doing more Gerhard in that respect soon. I'll be reading more of his, but I've been so edified by Luther. I think a lot of people should be spending time there. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, will say read Luther on one topic and say, oh, this is the summary of the Lutheran tradition. These are the best arguments that they have. It's like, well, I think Chemnitz, for example, argues a lot of the time better than Luther. More dense, more clear sometimes, more thorough. But when it comes down to like, hey, I want to see what's the best way to deal with like courage and standing for the truth, I think Luther has such an interesting life experience, or had such an interesting life experience, that there's almost no one better. There really is, on my mind. There's really no one better than Luther for a lot of those things. So I think in my life, compartmentalizing them and seeing where are these figures valuable is a really good way to specialize and get the most out of each figure given your time, right? In the ideal world, I could read everything from Gerhard, everything from Chemnitz, everything from Luther, and so on. But I don't have the time. I don't have the money. And so I've specialized in those ways. But I think in the future, I'm going to be referencing Luther more and using a bit more of him. The more I'm reading him, the more I'm catching some very interesting things, especially the way he writes things. Because, for example, Chemnitz and Gerhard are going to talk about how, well, there are some abuses in church history where they go against Christian freedom, and they do so in a very, very nice scholastic way and give the best arguments. But Luther, I think, is very good on a polemical level, saying things like, this, if you're binding someone's conscience to somebody that they should not be bound to, you have to answer for that on Judgment Day. And I just had not thought of it that way. Even though that's obviously what Chemnitz and Gerhard are saying, I think the way Luther presents a lot of this stuff is so phenomenal that I've probably underrated him and I need to use him more. So that's really all I have for today. So let me know if you guys want me to do more work with Luther, in fact, because I love obviously doing Chemnitz and Gerhard, and that gets, really good feedback. But if you want more of our stuff to go in a Luther direction and say summarize some of his works, you just let us know. We would love to do some of that. So thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you all in the comments, seeing you everywhere else. Have a good week. Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching another Scholastic Lutherans video. If you'd like to support us, you can contribute on Patreon or Subscribestar at Scholastic Lutherans. You'll get access to our Telegram chat, more content, and other perks. Links can be found in the description and in the pinned comments. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment, and have a nice day.